today we have two amazing people from the Figma Slides team themselves. Laura, who is a software engineer, and Keeyen, who's a product designer. They're really both amazing people who have been in the weeds of building Figma Slides. And without further ado, I'm just gonna let them slide into it. So, Keeyen, over to you.
Thanks, Jessica, for the amazing intro. Hi, I'm Keeyen. I'm product designer on the Figma Slides team, and I'm originally from Malaysia. So it's great to speak to my hometown if anyone's seen from Malaysia and fellow Southeast Asia countries. Just to recap, Figma Slide launched a month ago, and it's been very amazing to see the excitement from the community. Here's a quick video about it.
What upcoming Figma feature are you the most excited about?
Figma Slides.
I'm super excited about slides.
Slides. Many people are very excited about it. Everyone is using Google Slides. Finally, there's this new feature.
I'm really making slides in Figma. I can collaborate with people. It'll make my process so much faster.
It's a game changer.
So yeah, like really appreciate all the excitement that's coming from the community, and we also are very grateful that we got so much helpful feedback from y'all as well. And thanks to y'all for the feedback. The team has been very heads down into pushing out these improvement. And so far we have sprinted to ship 10 improvements in 10 days for y'all. So to highlight a few of my favorite things, like more transition controls for slides, layer lists on the grid view and design mode, and then the ability to hide slides. So while launching slides in Config 2024 has been an amazing experience, personally, the journey of how we get here is my highlight. So it's packed with ups and downs, and to set the stage, let's go back to January 2023, where the Flies team had just finished our vision sprint, presented to the leadership at Figma, and then got a green light on having more resources to staff the team so that we can continue exploring the potential of flights. For context, dev mode have not even launched yet at this time. From the start, there are a lot of hairy problems we have yet to dig into, such as how should slides appeal to both designer and non-designer audience, because the success of slides hinges on designers recommending it to their cross-functional partners such as engineers, product managers, researchers, and so forth. So it's very important to make a product that is appealing to designers, but is also accessible and easy to use to the non-designer partners, because there's no point of using something that your non-designer partners can use in. Another problem is UI3, if you're not familiar, is the name for the new Figma design editors redesign is going full steam ahead at this time as well. So there are a lot of open questions, right? How would it be compatible with what we want slides to be? We don't even know what slide is gonna be yet. And also, how should we work with the UI3 team to ensure that there are some sort of compatibility between both surfaces? Another thing that's popping out really quite a lot is AI is advancing quickly every other week. And what's our take here? Do we even have a stance of how should we approach AI at this time? So each of these areas are very new to us, and we're just figuring out our own shape and how we can fit into this puzzle by the end. So these ambiguity and constraints really drove us to be more scrappy and strategic for how we spend our time. We got very limited people working on it, so we learned a lot throughout the way as we continue to grow. So today we're excited to share our learnings for building slides with y'all. As designers, right, we have the power to inspire and help people visualize a future they would like to have. So I think the first learning I have is just to like dream big and help people see their visions. There's this like famous quote floating around like Twitter or somewhere else that I saw, which says, "A prototype is worth 1,000 meetings." And I agree with that. You know, I personally leverage a ton of prototypes when we are kind of like sprinting for our vision. And we have managed to like get, you know, investment from our leadership to spin up a team to continue exploring flights as a potential product. And here are some of the prototypes I would like to like share with you from our initial vision sprint. Right, like one of the core concepts is like the grid view, and we want to anchor on differentiators that plays into the strength of Figma, such as kind of like a freeform grid that allows you to see your deck in a bird's eye view, as well as like allow you to quickly iterate on your story arc with the ease of just like, you know, grabbing and reordering rows. Or, you know, building on top of the concept of like the slide grid, what if people can start and outline their story on the grid easily, and then maybe leverage AI to just take a first draft or first pass on the visuals? Or what if it can also like update live once you make changes to the presenter notes? We also experiment with a layout system that ensures beautiful by default outcomes along the way, since that we know winning non-designer audience is like very important. So, you know, what if you can also can allow you to like easily add Figma design mocks and easily add a device frame, which is something that's very tedious to do now. Tapping into the power of two-way storytelling, we experimented with making presentations more like conversations and find a way for presenter to, you know, facilitate feedback from the audience, such as a poll or aligning on an open question with your stakeholders, so that your meeting doesn't feel like lonely at all. Or maybe a surface area for an audience who can easily transition to a presenter when it's their turn to present, and have all their tools for them to like get a good presentation, such as timer and presenter notes. Learning number 2 here is just like embrace the simple path first, right? Like I forgot, I think Willie on the team start just like using this term like smooth brain, right? So we call it like, oh, smooth brain solutions often like outshines the overly smart ones, which tends to be too complex. To expand a little bit, I can kind of show you an example here on this like layout system I talked about just now. We call it like, this approach is like using containers where the entire slide is an auto layout essentially, you can think of, and you know, each container like just automatically fills the height and width of the given slide. So the benefit of this is like elements will reflow and adjust automatically, and you know, the spacing of these objects will always be like beautiful by default. But once we build a first version of this and put it in our internal like version of Figma called like staging, one big problem we realized right away is that people are starting to like fight with the system because they don't know the rules of the system is not clear. So it's very tedious to like just to drop ideas down on a slide. We did couple like iterations, and this is the one towards the end. For example, it's like we try loosening it up by doing a kind of block style approach similar to Notion, but it's still not enough to address the friction people face. The problem we realized is that we are solely just like optimized for like 1 or 2 flows that allows people to achieve an outcome, while in reality there's just like so many other ways people can do this kind of like common layout for a slide. We ended up just like falling back to a more like absolute position based approach, kind of like what you're familiar with Figma. Because yeah, it's just easier to let people place an object wherever they want instead of like forcing them with like guardrails and preventing them to like put down what they want. So once we landed there, we also kind of like explore ways to help people, tidy up after they place an item to like where they want in the slide and suggest them beautiful by default options. One of the things we explored that I'm very excited about is just like the ability to just like simply drag two text boxes together to have it stack into an auto layout. This is not out yet, but I'm very excited to like continue exploring this with the team and hope it comes out soon. So to like kind of summarize this section, is like I think this meme accurately reflects the spirit of like smooth brain solution and like overthinking it, right? So I think typically it's the ideal way to solve a problem first. I'm not saying like smooth brain ideas is like always the right approach, but it's more of like before you go all the way to like the full the most complex stuff and try to like be overly smart, try the most simple things first. Yeah, lesson number 3 that we learned is to spend more time on decision that will be hard to change down the line and spend less time on things that is easy to change anytime. So hopefully this helps us make decision faster and minimize like the regret we'll have down the line. For example, an example for like a hard problem that we spend a lot of time thinking first that will be hard to change down the line is like the overall concept and like model for theming and like how should a template work, right? Like what even is a theme? What does a theme contain? Does it include spacing? Does it include like grid layout, right? Like does it only just include text styles and color styles? Because once we ship this, it will be very hard to change down the line because it will affect people's like existing files. So yeah, all these like open question really just like took us a long time. You can see like Mahika, our PM on the team, like Carl, Chang, Laura, the engineers working on these areas. Like these are like some of like the most fun time I have like jamming with them in person. And an example for like an easy thing that can like change anytime essentially is, for example, the slide selection treatment here, something that just like a CSS change, hopefully. For context, we implement this specific change like I think 2 weeks before config. So yeah, another lesson here is to, it's often easier to ship something later than it is to remove something that's already been out in the world and people are using it. So for context, like I think a dedicated like theme panel is a good example for this. For context, a theme panel here was a concept for noodling that we were noodling around for a bit. It's a dedicated area for people to change the look and feel for the entire deck. So it has like a dedicated entry point and all that. Although there are benefits for a dedicated theme panel, there are things that we are unsure after we build a prototype and play with it on staging. For example, like who is this even for, right? Then, like should it be optimized for, non-designers to help them like play around and experiment on the visual and the feel of the entire deck? Or is it more for like a designer to have like a source of truth of all the textiles and color styles for the deck? Like is it for both, and how often would people even use this? There's just like so many things to figure it out before like config in such a way that we think it's better for us to just kind of like default to what exists for now in the system, which is how I'm sure like some of y'all will be familiar how you would edit a given like text style, color styles. Like we already have that model. So let's just, use that first and take a bit longer time to like think about how should we approach like a dedicated theme panel. So we decide to like remove this from our staging environment and ship without it for now. Because if we ship something we're not proud of and we take it back from y'all, some people will be upset for sure. So we decide not to do that yet. Yeah, so to recap, if you're not sure about certain solution, remove it first, because it's always easier to add things than it is to remove once it's shipped into people's hands. Another learning here is like lead with your interests and have fun with it. As a designer, I think it's part of our job to inspire the team what we should be working towards and have fun in the process. And not only this helps align the team on a similar vision, it also, may inspire some engineers that really share the same passion, and they just might like implement it earlier than they should. So yeah, I think you should like trust the intuition here. And if you find something interesting, most likely others will as well. So this is like an early prototype I just like kind of made. Even though like no one asked me to do it, or no one kind of like nudged me to explore these certain ideas, I just think that, it would be cool to just, if you can just like type out like a doc and somehow have it translate to a deck on the grid, and you can also kind of like edit the text directly on the slide grid as well. Wouldn't that be like cool? Or let's just say if you are in an icebreaker, would it be cool if you have some sort of like spin the wheel widget that you can just, assign someone to go first based on where it lands? I love like diving into the details, and although this is deemed like P2, P3 for config timeline, I think it's still cool to like, play around with like a stack of cards like treatment when you hover on the template. And it allows people to like easily use their cursor to like scrub through like the previews without them needing to, click into the template's like detail page. Or just like experimenting with some like components that acts as a scrubber, and like a text input field all in one. Would that be cool? Also, this is where like PomDAO is like kind of born out of too, right? Like Mahika shop around with this idea inspired by like Arc's browser color picker. And yeah, this is where it's born, and this is something we actually like shipped at Config. And one quick tip for like the designers on the call here is just like, if you end up like creating all these prototypes, feel free to just like keep them somewhere like persistent that is easily find and can be like reshared to people on your team, so they can like reference it in the future. Or maybe sometimes you overheard someone talk about an idea you already explored, you can just say, easily send them a link and, start the discussion over there. So here are some of the learnings like I talk about for the team. Now I'll hand it over to like Laura, the engineer on our team, to talk about other parts of the learning.
Hello, yeah. Just wanted to share some lessons from an engineer's perspective working on a new product. So the first one on my side is to don't get caught up on needing everything before you get started. The focus is really just on iterating. So often we think a feature or a project lifecycle might look something like this, where the PM comes up with a product requirement, hands it off to the designer mocks out the user flows and user interactions and hands it off to engineers, and the engineers implement the feature. But in ambiguous areas, and especially with a new product, we often just don't know what the best solution is going to be upfront. And our product specs and designs are constantly evolving and updating based on our learnings and feedback. So our cycle looks a little bit more like this, with arrows just like constantly pointing back towards each other and to a bunch of functions beyond PD and E, where we just want to start somewhere where we have some amount of conviction. And then we just want to iterate and learn as we go along the way. So one example is our Keeyen kind of mentioned it before, like themes was a huge rabbit hole. We really want to introduce this concept of template styles in slides, where every template comes with some preset recommended styles. And we weren't really quite sure what's the most approachable model here, besides the fact that like having some recommendations is much easier to jump into than having no recommendations at all to make something beautiful by default. So in the beginning, we actually started with something that was a really strict schema. we were like saying every template needs to have this fixed set of textiles. They need these names, and you need at least 6 colors in your palette. We then got some feedback internally that people really want the ability to be able to add more textiles and add more colors. So we went into this like partially enforced schema where you like needed this minimum baseline, but you could also add new properties into it. And over time, we learned that users just really valued flexibility. So today we actually have no schema. We let you define your template style however you want with whatever names and however many textiles and colors that you want, which is a really different starting point than where we started. But we kind of just learned over the course of time and getting feedback what users really wanted. And another fun example is our slide grid explorations. So we had some high level vision from Keeyen about this grid-like format, right? And we kind of know like, okay, we want a grid and we can start with a base case, right? Like how can I add a new slide? Addition is like, okay, like what does reordering potentially look like, right? So we just kind of prototype what that looks like. And then we start getting into more detailed spaces like, okay, now we have a grid and you can add slides and you can reorder slides. What does it look like to be able to go into single slide mode and then like reorder from there and then go back into grid view? Like, where is that slide? Does that work? And generally, like we just didn't have all the edge cases enumerated up front. And that's like totally okay. Like we just knew enough about the problem space to get started and we can kind of discover and play with these edge cases over time. We have also re-architected the system like multiple times. Like some prototype works well enough for a couple months, and then we come up against some major roadblock on like, okay, we really need this to be multiplayer friendly, so everyone can like play on the slide grid simultaneously. And we'll rebuild the system then. Another learning is that engineering prototypes really bring clarity to product ambiguity. So especially when we have these like big open questions of like which flow will feel better, I often build opinions by making these prototypes and then just like giving the prototypes to designers or PMs or to other people at the company, so they can play with it and then either reinforce their opinion or maybe they'll change opinions after trying it out. So one example is, you know, in our early explorations, we really wanted to figure out how to make this infinite canvas, which is, you know, our traditional Figma design approach, like feel approachable, but also fit the slides use case. So you might have seen our current iteration, which is what we call grid view, like all the slides fit in a grid, but we actually went through a ton of other explorations to get to where we are today. So this is a video of an alternative exploration we tried. We tried this version that we called slide trees. So imagine instead of a grid, like it's set up in a tree. We added these like red debug lines so you could try to understand like how this slide tree was wired up. Another version we tried was called slide islands, which we internally called slidelands. It's like, imagine you could have multiple islands of like slide decks in the same file. Like, how does that feel? And the way that we went about this is like, we just built scrappy edge prototypes for all these different approaches, right? Like our grid, our tree, our islands, and we all played with it and kind of built our opinions on how we felt. And often I think people build opinions a lot faster, especially when they have more visuals or more prototypes in hand. You know, people aren't sure what they think about it until they play with it. And sometimes you just immediately know if you're like in love with this or something feels a little bit off. Another example that we had explored was the template picker in our grid view. So we were trying to figure out ways to surface templates inside this infinite canvas. You know, should it be docked on the left side of the screen? Should it be on the right side? Should it be beside the slide you have selected? So this is a video of a prototype of what if it shows up beside the slide that you have selected. And in making this prototype, we actually discovered some really gnarly interactions. Like if you pan and then you like pan over this template picker and it can scroll, like your panning stops because the mouse events got swallowed. So basically we like ended up deprioritizing this because we realized this is a really tricky user interaction to get it to feel good. And this prototype kind of helped us push away a certain direction really quickly. Like, okay, this is like a huge can of worms. Actually, this other more simple approach will probably handle our use case and avoid this entire can of worms. And then a tip, if you're an engineer on a team and you kind of want to do more prototyping work in these ambiguous spaces, I like to time box my explorations. So I often will just cap the amount of time I will look into something with some specific outcome in mind. So for example, we often use this strategy when we're exploring some crazy new ideas, like things that don't exist in our system today, but we think it would be a really magical experience in Figma Slides. So for example, it's like, what does it take for us to build embeddable prototypes? Like, what does that mean and how could that feel? What does it take for us to build the ability to hide slides? So often we will just, block off a period of time and in this example say like Monday I'm going to explore how I could do this. Tuesday we'll riff a little bit with Keeyen to see if we can get interaction that feels good. And if it feels pretty good, like maybe Wednesday we'll just write the proposal and start floating around like, hey, what if we actually productionize this system? How does everyone feel about this approach? So hopefully some of these learnings kind of resonate with you guys. I hope that we were able to share a little bit of insight into the team on how we built Figma Slides and what we learned along the way. And just to wrap things up, I did want to share some closing thoughts. So often we only see the outcomes. So for example, we launched Figma Slides at Config, super exciting. Really glad we were able to bring it to you all. And often we think the process is equally smooth sailing, but in reality, it's really complicated. We explored a ton of directions, many of which that were never launched, like our slide trees and slide islands and all the videos Keeyen shared. We pivoted a ton of times. Our product spec has continuously been evolving all the way up until config. We were like making changes like a week or two beforehand as well when we just like find more edge cases that we think we can do better on. Design and Keeyen has to adapt to all these new flows. Engineers have re-architected our systems like over and over again. And we sometimes start with these like really complicated solutions, and then we end up with a smooth brain solution at the end. We end up with a much simpler one compared to the one that we like really thought so much about. And the process is really messy, and we just have to embrace that messiness and keep learning and refining at every turn. And the process is just as important as the outcome. And I think a friendly reminder is just don't forget to have fun on the way. Even preparing for this talk, I had a little fun. I messaged a teammate on the spot like, hey, can you draw these like really cute scribbles for the previous slide? Like, I think this is a really good message, but I think we could have some even cuter scribbles. So thanks, Katie, for that. And thank you for the entire Figma Slides team. It's a huge effort to be able to bring Figma Slides to life. And it's definitely not possible without an incredibly passionate group of individuals that care. And it wouldn't be complete to have the Figma Slides team without taking a photo at some slides at a playground. And thank you for all the community also for being here and kind of letting us share some of our thoughts with you. And with that being said, we will transition over to the Q&A portion.
Thank you, both of you. Oh my gosh, it was amazing to be able to hear directly from both of you who have built this amazing product. I'm sure everyone is curious and you guys have a lot of questions. So let's jump in. What I'm gonna do here is that I'm gonna be updating the Q&A slides like in real time, which is amazing. So let's get to the first question. For every one of you who have more questions, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section below. But first question from Xavier, I'm gonna just paste it here and then you will be able to see. I think this is more for like Keeyen or like I think Laura, if you have any thoughts on this. So how do you know which ideas are worth the time to prototype? Is this an intuition thing? If like a PM is telling you just because it seems fun, like how do you decide on which one to prototype?
Yeah, I can take this first and feel free to chime in, Laura, if you have more thoughts. I think, yeah, I think there's like several criteria you can like ask yourself, like, personally, how much do you care about this idea? And then like second is like how hard is it for you to kind of validate, get how high of a fidelity do you need this prototype for it to help you validate if it's worth it or not, right? So I think the most easiest way to start, like the lowest effort is just like a simple mock. And if a mock doesn't like scratch that itch for you and doesn't you still think there's potential, then you can like level up to, you know, a very janky like wireframe or like a click prototype. And if it's something like Figma Slides where you're prototyping things with like canvas behavior, then you know that is definitely like a high effort prototype. So I think normally personally I tend to just try to lean in the first two first, just like figure a way out that's like the easiest to help me validate in the cheapest cost. And if it's something that's like a heavier lift, such as like a very high fidelity prototype that might need like engineering help, I think definitely I would just like, you know, socialize that idea with your team, right? If you yourself is not super confident about it, then you should, you know, socialize with your team, like with the engineers or like the PM on your team and see if it's like worth it or not. But if you have high conviction, you should totally do it and don't let anyone, you know, tell you not to do it or wait for someone to like green light you to do it. You should just do it, I think.
Laura, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Keeyen said. On the engineering side, I think some things that we really love prototyping out of the blue is things that feel like they have been traditional constraints in our system. So we almost like assume it's not possible. And then suddenly we have this like enlightenment and we're like, hey, I bet if I hacked at this for a day, it's totally possible and like unlocks this other flow we've never considered before. And often like showing people like, hey, I actually think this is possible and here's how you can go about it. I think really inspires like other people at the company too on joining our slides ship and like helping us make that a reality as well. So sometimes we just like want to use prototypes as a way to like inspire other engineering teams.
Definitely. All right. The next question is from Risithran. How is usability testing done for a huge feature like this? Was it all internal or external users were involved? Any one of you can take this.
Yeah, I can take this. I think there's a ton of user testing done and not just like usability testing because you know we started socializing these ideas from the very beginning of our vision sprint. So literally the second week into I think our vision sprint is like a little bit less than a month, like I think like 3 weeks. Like the first week where I like explore a ton of like prototypes and visual exploration. The second week we as a team were already working with researchers like you know Gus and Krista to like have a set of questions and show those prototypes to people and see if they're resonating with it. So that's like the first phase, right? Because I think it's important to like gut check the ideas you're excited about and not just within internal audience because everyone at Figma has some biases and they do know Figma very well already. So it doesn't really reflect like the how external audience will like feel about it. And that's like the first phase of like just concept testing. No one's actually like using it. And once we have some sort of, you know, playable like engineering prototypes, such as all the videos that like Laura showed you on the earlier version of like the slide grid or like the layouting system, we are already kind of like scheduling these kind of like usability testing to not necessarily like get a feel for like learn how what they like or don't like, but more of like observing like an overall theme, right? Like if they don't like it, we need to know why and not just kind of do something they just like do something they say they want, you know, not just giving people directly what they want, but mostly like understanding what's working versus like what's not working and kind of like iterate to it. So yeah, Krista, the researchers on our team has been like super like helpful into like nudging us to show these ideas out externally and towards the third phase, which is I think like 5 months leading to like config, where we have a more like stable version. We started having like alpha testers from handpicked like companies who are interested in helping us try it out. So we'll invite them to like a Slack channel and give them access for a few people on the team, and they'll just like send us feedback in that Slack channel throughout the entire time.
Thank you, Keeyen. Okay, I have a very interesting question, or rather, like I think something that's very relatable to all of us. So, Laura, you mentioned that you covered like how, process of in Figma, PD is always nonlinear. So, an anonymous attendee asked a question. I'm curious what the relationship between product management, design, and engineering is like. How do you handle the ambiguity of a new space together?
I think for us, like handling ambiguity, we just we're very pointed in like what we're trying to tackle at any point in time. Like there's a lot of things that will blur together simultaneously. So it's just like, okay, let's just like think about our layouting system. Like what are our concrete like open questions or things that we feel more strongly about, and things that we just have no idea like how people are going to feel about it. And we start with like the big I think he had mentioned like our big open scary questions that are hard for us to walk back. We will often actually start with like the most opinionated stance that might be the most divisive way of building something, but it's like by building the extreme version, we'll actually get a lot of insight into like how does this idea resonate or not resonate with people, and like what bits do we need to dial back. And I would say at Figma, especially, is that like it feels like people are pretty open to flexing their muscles in a lot of different roles. Like it doesn't really feel like, okay, only the PM is the one who will like come up with a product spec. Like Keeyen will also sometimes like draw out flows and he's like, I think this is going to be the product spec. Like I think this is the right user interaction. Or like engineers, as we're building the prototype, it's like I also have a lot of opinions on like what's the proper flow. So it's honestly like quite collaborative in that sense of like how we come up with our specs and how we flesh out our design flows. And even when we're like tactically executing. Mahika thought it'd be really fun at some point. Mahika pushed a line of code into our code base too, so we have to have like a line of code committed to every team member, even if they're not an engineer. If that kind of gives some insight. But Keeyen, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on like how we handle PDE and plus for all the other functions as well.
Yeah, I think I agree with all the points, and I just want to like, highlight what Laura said. There's just no concrete like divided in roles and what people do. Like I think roles is in a Figma just like you get to spend more time doing it, but not necessarily like you are just sticking with that forever, right? We help with like research, we Laura said like, yeah, Mahika commits to some code, and like a lot of the very good designers I work with at Figma are engineers in their role, and they tackle like the most like gnarliest like interaction problem that often design didn't catch in edge cases. So yeah.
I think I just want to echo on that, like Yuki mentioned about like how what sets us apart, right? Like I think being irrationally passionate means like you're just going outside of like what you're comfortable with, or like just collaborating in a team, which makes like things possible in Figma. I think like how you cross collaborate and cross pollinate within different functions to just like make things happen in a way. So each individually, all of us are irrationally passionate with like what we love to do, and having that interest in like other functions as well. Great. I will move on to the next question. From Sang Hyo. And he mentioned, considering Figma design, including prototype and styles, already has tons of features. How do you communicate with the whole Figma team, a design team, I presume, to connect all of these features accordingly, or rather to make it a holistic experience? Any one of you can answer this.
Yeah, I can speak a bit from just like the product and design side because I know, Laura and all the other engineers on the team collaborated a lot with the design system teams to ensure all the foundations we are laying on top of existing like concepts or existing systems that Figma design really has is compatible with what we want to build. Um, I think, yeah, just like solely from like a product and design perspective, I think the first step our team did is to just like don't think about any other existing things. Just think solely in a perspective of like what's the best for our intended users, which is, product managers, non-designers, and sometimes like designers. Like what is the best possible experience for them in a slide deck building like context, and then slowly work your way out because I think it's just too many like open questions to like consider what if you think about all the things at once. And once we have like a perspective of like, okay, yeah, this is how we think, theming should work. Like this is how we think like slides like templates should work. Then we start to like kind of socialize those ideas to cross-functional teams like, design systems, like design editor on the like the layouting related part, since there are some overlapping like ideas on auto layout. I think on design behavior, I think we have like a mutual understanding on the team. Is just like whenever you are working on features that might affect Figma design's behavior, such as, oh, we want auto layout to like behave this way, we should definitely like socialize that idea early with the design team on the editor, and either kind of like decide like, okay, yeah, it makes sense that we both, the design editor and slides, kind of share that behavior together, or actually, yeah, it's okay if we like deviate here and slides can like do its own thing for now. Yeah, that's like a high level of how we go about it. Do you, I'm sure like, yeah, Laura, you might have thoughts on like how does that work in from like the engineering side. I know you're collaborated a lot with like design systems.
Yeah, I think like to Keeyan's point, it's important to start from thinking almost selfishly about your product first, right? Like what really sets slides apart. And then from there on the engineering side, like we are very strategic and intentional when it's like when we make a deviation, we can explain like exactly what are the reasons why this deviation makes sense, right? Otherwise, from an engineering side and from a side of like we want Figma design users to feel like Figma Slides is natural. We want these concepts to kind of work nicely with each other. So it should be very well thought out when we are like introducing a departure. Like this is a departure that needs to happen for slides because this is a very different product flow versus like, hey, how can we just reconcile these two ideas together? It'll both make engineering the system like a lot more straightforward and also kind of be able to unlock some features that might not be here today, but not block us out of these future worlds. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, and the next question revolves around handover process. I think this is like almost like a meta question a little bit, because like what were the top things worked on from design to development handoff in Figma for Figma Slides team?
Um, I I think it's very
Can you
messy.
start first and then
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I think honestly, I don't think I write like I do very detailed like design handout specs until maybe like 2 months or 2 months before like config, once we start like polishing things up. That's because like before that, everything else is like we are not even sure if it will work, right? So I think a lot of these, either from the lowest fidelity, is literally just like text box of like describing how it might work to some sort of like, interaction flows. And I try to like make it as high fidelity as possible. But yeah, in terms of trying to like hand it off to engineers, I definitely just like lean onto like who are the engineers working on a given designs that I'll be handing off, like because it really depends on people's working style. Like some engineers might need more visuals or like more explanation. Some are just like cool with just running with it and see what happens. And I definitely don't think it's like a one time and handoff thing, right? Like I think it it's always like back and forth given the nature of like how much edge cases the editor has. So yeah, I think we treat like handoff as just like a first pass, and typically like the engineers, like for example Laura, will send out like a testing kind of like link for us to just like try it out directly. And yeah, I hope, I wish I have some of like the Figma files here. I can like show some of the handoffs here, but I don't think I have the file open for now.
No worries, but like Laura, in terms of your perspective as an engineer receiving like Keeyen's file, like I don't know, what are your thoughts on this? Like,
Yeah, Keeyen, I don't know what Keeyen thinks of his mocks, but I think he has incredibly high fidelity mocks in like very short amounts of time. Like sometimes we'll just be like, hey, what about this flow? And he'll just like send out a file that's just like, okay, like here's this entire flow. I made it like in the past hour. It is crazy. But yeah, I think generally like the way that we developed slides, it's mostly vibes based in the sense that like Keeyen will send out a mock that helps convey like the vision he's going for, right? Like this is generally the problem areas, and then it's the handoff is mostly in the sense like, okay, like let's just try building out this block and see where we get. And often we'll like be building out bits and we're like, hey, by the way, Keeyen, this part is really hard. We're not going to build it now. Like I don't think it adds to our prototype. Like it's not as important at this stage of this development. He's like, okay, cool, sounds good. And then we'll like build it out, we'll play with it, and he'll be like, oh, hey, I actually like want to try tweaking like these 3 things. I've like made a couple new sketches to handle this, and then we'll just like take it from there. We'll like make those changes and like keep iterating in that sense. And often the design handoff is also on like a need space of just like as we're building out this, we're like, hey, actually we just like found these 3 extra edge cases that we don't have mocks for and we haven't really thought about. And Keeyen's like, okay, let me like go sketch out how we should handle these edge cases. And if it's like really confusing, we'll just like all like huddle together and like try a couple different things until it's like, okay, yeah, I think this one feels pretty good. Like let's just full send and see how this feels, and wait for some internal feedback to help guide like which direction to go from there.
I think it's just being fluid, right? In general, like just go with the
Yeah,
flow.
I would also say like the fluidity like kind of changes over the stage of your product. Like early stage is like super fluid because the kinds of question we have are so big and broad. Like we really aren't at the point where we're pixel pushing. It's just like, does this concept resonate? And then as we get closer to config, yeah, like we really started tightening up like all the visual details. So then, yeah, like there are mocks that we could just overlay Keeyen's mock with like what we have internally. It's like, hey, this corner radius is like off by 2 pixels. Like we could have that level of detail and like enforce all those bits. So like then it became a little bit more like we have a design that has kind of been handed off in the sense that we are actually comparing like every little detail from the mocks to what we have internally. But before that, it's like super fluid. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, it's so much fun, I think, which is a good segue to like the last question from Erica. I think with like the whole, I wouldn't say chaos, but like the whole like momentum and like energy of like building, how any tips from both of you for keeping positive and creative energy flowing when iterating so much, especially when there's time crunch for a config?
Yeah, I can chime in first. Like I think there's like 2 things. One is setting the right expectations for every single like for example, like every single handoff. And secondly, it's like just like get alignment on why we are iterating with the team could help, right? So like the first point is, for example, whenever I hand off something to like the engineering team, I'll always like preface like, okay, this is how confident are we? You know, what are the chances that we might need to change this again so that that can help inform the team to like build in a way that is for like quote unquote like ready for production versus like something that might be throwaway code just to if it's just something to help us validate something earlier. So yeah, I think like setting the right expectation is very important. And second thing is just like, let's just say you are, like as a designer, you are very confident in this proposal, this interaction. You hand it off, it got built. It's an internal staging. People internally try it and they hate it, right? That's like what are you gonna do now? I think now in this case it's like we I will like, we'll get together and we'll try to like, if you really feel strongly about making an improvement and doing another iteration that the team did not, account for that timeline, then I think the first thing is just like get one on the same page, which is, do y'all agree why this is not working and how bad do you like everyone within the room will kind of like talk about how bad do you think this is if we just like, move forward with this, or do we feel strongly we need to like change it? And I think if everyone on your team, cares about the end outcome, if it's something that's important to change, no, everyone will be like happy to change it, I'll say.
Laura, any thoughts on
Yeah.
this?
I think at least for the Figma Slides team, like one part that helps me handle with all the iteration is like everyone is very lighthearted in everything that we do. Like even things that could be big and scary, we're just like, oh hey, that happened. Like what can we learn from this and like how do we move forward? Like I don't think any kinds of more constructive feedback or think like people telling us they love the product versus like people telling us they're like super confused about this corner, I think just like has equal amounts of impact on my mood, honestly. Like I'm happy to just like get feedback and understand a bit more like what is resonating and what needs a little bit more thought. And I think when you have a group of people who are what was your quote, like just very passionate about like what they're building, like people want to find the solutions that really resonate with people. And like iterating is just a process to getting to that stage. So I find it just like part of the job. Yeah.
Thank you, both of you. Amazing, amazing answers. Well, I don't want to keep both of you awake. Thank you so much for sparing both of your time. It has been so much fun. So to all of you, before we close, just a few things to call out. We just push a Zoom poll to all of you. If you could just spare your time or second to actually complete the poll. We are also hosting another live stream related to Figma Slides, which is called Principles of Effective Communication, featuring my lovely colleagues Corey Lee and Hugo Raymond on September 4th. We'll drop the registration link in the chat shortly. So yeah, thank you so much, Laura, Keeyen. It has been a blast having both of you here. I know it's late for you, Keeyen. Thank you, Keeyen's mom, for tuning in. I hope everyone here enjoys the talk. These two are simply amazing. And please get the feedback going. If you guys have any feedback for Figma Slides or anything, feel free to drop any more questions, feedback to any of us. We'll be happy to surface to the product team. Have a great night, day, afternoon, everyone. And I'll see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, Jessica. Bye.
Thanks, Keeyen. Thanks, Laura. I'll
Thank
see you.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.